I am Christopher, and in this episode, I'm looking at 6 cases where law enforcement officers were unfortunately attacked by wild animals. From a rural raid in Texas that ended in a nightmare with a lion, to a police officer that was struck by one of the most venomous snakes in existence. Let's start with the first story, which took place inside a building that held far more than anyone on the entry team knew about. It was March 18th, 2014, on a rural property roughly 40 miles southeast of Dallas, Texas. Pre-dawn darkness covered the scrubland and the scattered outbuildings across the property. Several officers noted something in their reports afterward, a heavy, dense smell in the air that didn't match livestock or guard dogs. Nobody flagged it before they went in. Marcus Delaney, 36, had spent 8 years in the Army's military police before moving into civilian law enforcement. He worked felony warrant service for a county division and was known for staying controlled and precise during high-risk entries. He had been through dozens of similar operations without incident. That morning was supposed to be one more. The warrant was built around evidence of illegal firearms storage and distribution. Neighbors had reported unusual animal sounds at night and livestock going missing nearby, but during the investigation, those details were attributed to guard dogs or poorly kept farm animals. Nobody had reason to think the property held anything beyond weapons and contraband. The operation started at around 5:15 in the morning. Officers breached the main building and immediately ran into reinforced interior doors, surveillance cameras, and a smell that got heavier the further in they went. The kind that comes from a large animal enclosure. The inside of the building didn't match what it looked like from outside. Behind the garage, a secondary hallway connected to a hidden section of the structure that had been walled off and couldn't be seen from any outside angle during the surveillance phase. During a hallway push near the back of the building, a firefight broke out between the deputies and the property owner. A round hit the locking mechanism on a heavy steel gate built into the wall of the concealed holding area. The latch failed. The noise and the impact from the firefight panicked the lion inside, and it forced its way through the damaged gate and into the corridor. I've come across cases involving illegally kept exotic animals in my research before, and what gets me every time is how completely invisible that risk is until the exact moment it isn't. What really stands out here is how normal everything looked right up until it wasn't. No one on that entry team was walking into what actually waited for them inside that building. A full-grown male African lion weighs between 330 and 420 pounds. In short bursts, it can approach speeds of 50 miles per hour in open terrain. In the wild, a lion might vocalize, stalk, or circle before committing to an attack, giving some kind of warning. In a tight corridor with active gunfire going off, lights flashing, and the smell of blood in the air, none of that happens. The animal is overwhelmed, and the response is immediate and physical. Delaney had become separated from his team after slipping on debris near the hallway entrance. He was about 20 feet from the nearest officer when the lion entered his section of the corridor. The animal drove into him at speed. Forepaws forward, full body weight behind them. The impact put Delaney on the floor instantly. The lion's jaws came down on the back of his neck in the same motion. The attack was over in seconds. A crushing bite in that position causes rapid incapacitation. There is very little time between that kind of contact and loss of consciousness. Officers at either end of the corridor still could not get a safe shot without risking hitting Delaney. By the time the angle cleared, the critical injury had already been done. Delaney was unresponsive by the time the animal was neutralized. Medical personnel confirmed he died from a bite injury to the neck, consistent with a large captive felid attack in a confined space. He had been separated from his team for less than 90 seconds. After the operation, a full sweep of the property found multiple illegally held exotic animals in reinforced enclosures throughout the hidden secondary structure. The trafficking operation had been running for years. The formal. Review noted that the neighbor reports about animal sounds and missing livestock, if taken seriously during the investigation phase, would have completely changed how the entry was planned. the Warrant Division updated its protocol for rural properties to require proper evaluation of any animal disturbance reports before a breach is approved. What stays with me about Delaney's case is that every decision he made that morning was the right one. The danger wasn't in anything he did. It was in what nobody confirmed before he walked through that door. The next case is completely different. Total darkness, open water, and one physical choice in a routine moment that left no margin at all. It was August 2nd, 2016, on a flooded bayou road in southern Louisiana. Standing water had swallowed the lane markers, and the tree canopy above blocked out any moonlight. A storm had moved through the area over the previous 2 days, pushing water deep into the marsh channels and displacing wildlife into areas it normally wouldn't occupy. From the surface, the water looked like just water. Bryce Landry, 42, had worked overnight patrol in southern Louisiana for 11 years. Before that, he had served as a Coast Guard mechanic with hands-on experience in flood response and shallow water work. He knew these bayous well, the channels, the currents, how the marsh behaved after a heavy storm. That familiarity had built up over more than a decade without a serious incident. It was also part of what drove the choice he made that night. Landry and his partner had been assigned after midnight to run a debris and evidence sweep along submerged rural roads following the storm. They were in a flat-bottom patrol boat, moving slowly through a flooded marsh channel with a spotlight sweeping the water. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Landry spotted what looked like a dark, partially submerged mass sitting near some reeds on the right side of the channel. Instead of using the boat's retrieval pole to check it safely, he leaned over the side to look directly. American alligators are built around one thing: staying hidden and striking without warning. A large one can sit almost completely underwater, with only its eyes and nostrils barely at the surface. And in darkness against murky water and floating debris, those features are invisible. Alligators don't approach gradually. They hold still and wait, sometimes for a long time, and when movement or vibration reaches them, the strike is reflexive and immediate. The bite force of a large American alligator tops 2,900 pounds per square inch, among the highest recorded for any animal in North America. Once those jaws close, they close completely. From the surface, this looked like routine work in flood conditions, and that's what makes these kinds of situations so deceptive. Because once you've worked enough of these environments, it becomes easy to treat them like they're readable, like you can tell what's safe just by experience. But water like this doesn't stay consistent long enough for that kind of certainty to matter. The gator was likely resting near the debris pile, motionless in the dark water. The moment Landry's hand broke the surface, the movement and vibration triggered an instant strike. The jaws clamped onto his forearm before he could react, and the force threw his upper body sideways over the rail. The flat-bottom boat's low profile gave him nothing to hold on to. He went into the channel before his partner could do anything. The water was completely opaque with runoff and sediment, zero visibility below the surface. The alligator rolled almost immediately, the spinning motion pulling Landry under within seconds of contact. His partner moved the boat toward the disturbance and called for help, but nothing was visible below the surface, and no shot could be taken safely with Landry in the water. Landry's remains were recovered the following morning in a flooded drainage channel about 200 yards downstream from the point of attack. Wildlife officials estimated the alligator responsible exceeded 13 feet in length and around 600 pounds. The department issued a formal protocol change afterward. All debris inspection in low visibility floodwater would require retrieval tools only. No manual checks from over the side of the boat. Landry had spent more than a decade working that exact stretch of Louisiana bayou. He trusted it completely. That trust, on that night, was what removed the margin entirely. The next case moves to a Florida beach during a summer storm. An officer who entered the surf, even though every organized water operation around her had already been shut down. Why that decision was made in that moment, and what happened in the water before anyone on shore could reach her. It was July 11th, 2015, off a public beach on Florida's Atlantic coast. A fast-moving summer storm had churned the surf and turned the water a dark brown from drainage runoff. A lightning advisory had been active since mid-morning. By early afternoon, organized water rescue operations had been shut down, and lifeguards pulled back to shore. The beach had thinned out, but it hadn't cleared. Natalie Mercer, 31, worked coastal patrol and had competed as a swimmer before entering law enforcement. She had responded to water emergencies in surf conditions multiple times and was considered one of the stronger officers on her unit when it came to physical water response. That reputation was earned over years of real calls. It was also part of why she was the one who went in that afternoon. A call came in reporting a teenager caught in a rip current about 60 feet from the pier. Responding officers could see the victim clearly from the pier level, and what they saw wasn't someone floating and calling for help. The teenager was going under repeatedly, coming back up each time with his arms barely moving, then going down again. A flotation device was being set up for a throw from the pier above, but the setup was going to take more time than the victim had. Mercer entered the surf. From a distance, this still looks like a rescue decision, someone responding to a life or death situation. But what gets overlooked in moments like that is how unstable everything already is before anyone even enters the water. At that point, you're not stepping into control. You're stepping into conditions that are already moving faster than any single person can manage. Bull sharks are one of the most dangerous coastal shark species in the world. Unlike most large sharks that stay in deeper open water, bull sharks are built for warm, shallow, and murky conditions, exactly what was sitting off that beach that afternoon. Storm runoff had pushed baitfish toward the structural pylons of the pier, concentrating prey activity right where Mercer and the victim were positioned. Witnesses on the pier above saw a sharp disturbance in the water about 30 feet from the nearest pylon, not consistent with wave action or the rip current. A bull shark struck Mercer on her right leg, the bite landing just above the knee and tearing through the major blood vessels in the upper thigh. She didn't go under immediately. She came back to the surface and held her position in the water, but the injury had opened the femoral artery. Blood loss from that kind of wound is fast and gets worse with every second. The rip current was still pulling. The physical effort of keeping the victim above the surface was still there. There was no way to stop what was already happening. A lifeguard re-entered the water from the pier side and reached the teenager within minutes. Mercer was recovered shortly after. She was unresponsive by the time she was brought to shore and died from blood loss before any medical response could intervene. The teenager survived. Marine biologists brought in during the post-incident review noted that the conditions that afternoon, murky runoff, baitfish concentrated against the pier pylons, active movement in the water, were consistent with elevated shark activity regardless of the season or time of day. From shore, it looked like rough surf. Below the surface, it was functioning as a feeding zone. Mercer went into that water for the only reason that would have made sense, because someone was actively going under in front of her, and the window was almost gone. What happened had nothing to do with a bad decision. It had to do with an environment that was far more dangerous below the surface than it looked from the shore. The next case shares something with this one. An experienced person in familiar terrain, moving past the specific safety measures put in place for that exact area that same morning, and what was waiting when those measures were bypassed. It was September 27th, 2017, in a section of dense lodgepole pine forest in rural Montana. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the light was already fading. The undergrowth was thick enough in places to cut visibility down to under 20 feet. The ground near the creek drainage was wet from recent rain. The air had a sharp, heavy organic smell to it, the kind that anyone with real backcountry experience recognizes immediately as a large animal feeding nearby. Ethan Rourke, 39, had spent 7 years working as a combined sheriff's deputy and wilderness liaison, coordinating law enforcement across remote terrain in the region. Before that, He had served in a military reconnaissance unit. He was comfortable operating alone, trusted his own read of a situation, and had built up a long run of successful solo backcountry responses. Over time, that track record had quietly worn down the caution that this kind of terrain demands from everyone, regardless of how much experience they have. A missing hunter had been reported that morning. A multi-team search was organized across several grid sections. 2 separate teams earlier that same day had documented fresh grizzly tracks and clear feeding signs near a creek drainage in the northeast section of the search area. That information was radioed back to search leadership, and a recommendation went out for all teams in that corridor to move in pairs. No fewer than 2 people at a time. Rourke moved ahead of his assigned partner and entered that corridor alone. In late September, grizzly bears in the northern Rockies are eating almost constantly, pushing hard to build up fat reserves before winter. That keeps them near food sources for long stretches of the day and makes them highly reactive to anything that gets too close. A female grizzly with cubs near an active food source is one of the highest risk encounter situations documented in North American wilderness records. At close range with cubs nearby, she doesn't bluff. The charge starts immediately, and it's purely defensive. I've gone through enough grizzly encounter reports to know that even experienced backcountry personnel say the same thing in hindsight. No matter how much you know about it going in, the speed is something you are never actually ready for. Rourke got to within about 25 feet of a female grizzly before either of them knew the other was there. She was at the edge of a partially eaten elk carcass with at least one cub nearby. The moment she detected him, the charge began. No warning sound, no bluff run. At 25 feet, there was not enough time or distance to reliably deploy bear spray, let alone draw and fire a sidearm. The gap closed before a defensive response was possible. Rourke attempted to draw his sidearm, but was knocked to the ground before he could complete the draw. The bear delivered repeated strikes and bites focused on his upper torso, shoulders, and head, consistent with a defensive attack where the objective is to stop the perceived threat as fast as possible. Once Rourke stopped moving, the bear returned to the carcass and her cubs. Search teams found the site about 2 hours later. The ground near the elk carcass and the game trail showed clear evidence of a high-intensity defensive bear encounter. Rourke was found several yards away. He did not survive. Wildlife officials euthanized the grizzly after the bear continued showing aggressive behavior toward recovery personnel at the site. The incident was later incorporated into formal search and rescue training materials, specifically for protocols governing solo movement through active grizzly feeding areas. Every signal that day pointed to exactly what that section of forest contained. Rourke had the training and experience to read all of it correctly. He went in alone regardless. The next case is set in northern Japan, and it's a different kind of story. One where the outcome traces back to decisions that were made long before the animal ever came into the picture. It was November 4th, 2013, on a rural road in Hokkaido, Japan. The temperature had dropped below 40 degrees Fahrenheit after dark. Highway lights were spaced far enough apart to leave long stretches of road in near total darkness. The tree line started about 15 feet from the asphalt, and past it, the ground dropped into a drainage ditch thick with undergrowth and brush. Wildlife warning signs had been posted along the road shoulder at regular intervals, placed there weeks earlier because of documented bear activity in that specific area. Colin Mercer, 46, was on personal travel through Hokkaido, spending a few days in the region on his own. Among colleagues back home, he had a known pattern of dismissing safety guidance he didn't think applied to him and making impulsive decisions in unfamiliar places. That had come up professionally more than once during his career. Mercer spent the evening at a roadside establishment near the highway and drank heavily before leaving on foot by himself. The building sat directly adjacent to a stretch of forested drainage land that local wildlife authorities had specifically flagged for bear activity throughout that autumn. Garbage that had been dumped near the tree line had been drawing bears to the area repeatedly, and the warning signs along the road shoulder were a direct response to confirmed encounters in the weeks before. Mercer walked off the road and into that drainage area in the dark. Hokkaido is home to the Ussuri brown bear, the largest land predator in Japan, with large males reaching weights between 440 and 880 pounds, and standing over 6 feet tall when upright. Brown bears are not ambush hunters the way large cats or crocodiles are, but they react hard and fast when something startles them at close range, especially when they're near food. In late autumn, Ussuri brown bears are in a period of near constant eating to build up reserves before winter. That keeps them active for long hours and pulls them close to garbage sites and roadsides well into the night. The encounter records from Hokkaido around garbage-related activity near roadsides are consistent and well documented. Those signs weren't posted as a precaution. They reflected real, recent incidents. Mercer's level of intoxication stripped away both his coordination and any awareness of his surroundings. In the darkness of the drainage area, he got within roughly 15 feet or less of a brown bear actively scavenging near the bottom of the ditch. Neither of them had time to react. The bear responded defensively. The initial contact knocked Mercer off his feet. On the dark, uneven ground of the ditch, he could not get back up. The attack was brief but severe before the bear disengaged and retreated into the tree line. Passing motorists reported brief sounds of disturbance from the roadside brush, but did not approach because of the darkness and the visible wildlife warnings posted along the shoulder. Mercer was located by local authorities later that night. Injuries were consistent with a defensive brown bear encounter. Claw and bite damage concentrated on the upper body. He was confirmed dead at the scene. The official report identified alcohol impairment and accidental close-range contact with a foraging bear as the primary contributing factors. The drainage area was temporarily closed while wildlife authorities conducted an assessment. No specific animal was confirmed or destroyed. What makes Mercer's case hard to sit with is that every warning was already in place. The signs were posted. The risk was documented and specific to that exact location. None of it made a difference, because every decision that led him into that drainage ditch in the dark had already been made before he stepped off the road. The final case in this episode is set on a rural property in the Philippines, and it's different from every other story covered today. Every other case involved a physical attack that lasted seconds or minutes. This one came down to a single bite, and then a race against time that nobody on the team was prepared to run. It was May 9, 2018, on a rural property in Laguna Province, Philippines, where narrow dirt roads cut between dense secondary growth, and the air smelled of damp wood and animals. From the road, the property looked like an ordinary small farm, a main building, 2 outbuildings, and a lean-to shed at the back. A tip passed to a local criminal investigations unit had flagged it as a staging and holding site for a wildlife trafficking network operating through the Batangas port export route, a pipeline used to move protected species out of Luzon under cover of legitimate cargo shipments. Adrian Salonga, 37, had spent 6 years working organized crime cases focused on wildlife trafficking tied to port logistics in the region. He was experienced and methodical on the investigative side of that work, but he had no formal training in live animal assessment or handling in the field. The unit arrived mid-morning under a time-sensitive warrant. Wildlife enforcement. Personnel from the regional DENR office had been notified and were en route, but had not yet arrived on site when the team began their sweep. The main building showed evidence consistent with the tip: modified interior spaces, feeding equipment, and several empty transport crates. Most of the animals had already been moved. The outbuildings at the back were searched next. The last structure was a lean-to storage shed, roughly 12 by 15 feet. Dim, poorly ventilated, and packed with old equipment, feed sacks, and a row of stacked wooden crates along the far wall. Salonga entered the shed as part of an initial sweep under those time-sensitive warrant conditions, before a full hazard classification of the holding structures had been completed. One of the crates along the far wall had a damaged latch. The lid sat slightly open. Nobody on the team had a full picture of what each container had been holding. King cobras are the longest venomous snake in the world, with large adults commonly reaching between 12 and 15 feet in length. They are not native to Luzon, but animals smuggled in from Indonesia and Malaysia through maritime cargo pipelines. The exact kind of network this unit had been investigating are a documented feature of trafficking operations across the Philippine port system. Their venom is primarily neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system and breaking down nerve signal transmission. Progressive muscular paralysis follows, and without treatment, that process moves toward respiratory failure. From everything I've read on king cobra encounters in captive and trafficking contexts, that combination, a large animal, an enclosed space, no exit, is what removes the usual window people rely on to recognize the danger before it's too late. Salonga was working along the far wall, checking the stacked crates. As he reached toward the crate with the damaged latch to move it away from the wall, the king cobra inside, partially extended through the gap in the lid, struck from less than 2 feet away. The bite landed on the back of his right hand. The contact was brief. The snake pulled back immediately. The bite was visible, and the pain set in right away. Salonga stepped back from the crate and alerted the other officers. The team secured the shed and called for medical assistance. At that point, the full weight of what a king cobra bite meant, in terms of how quickly things could deteriorate, was not immediately understood by everyone on the ground. Swelling at the bite site progressed within the first 10 minutes. By the time the team had Salonga moving toward their vehicle, the systemic effects had already begun. Dizziness, trouble focusing, nausea. The nearest hospital with the capacity to treat serious envenomation and likely to carry king cobra anti-venom was over an hour away by road. The property sat on narrow rural roads, and no air medical response was available in the area. Wildlife enforcement personnel arrived at the property shortly after the vehicle had already left. Salonga's condition deteriorated during transport. Rapidly worsening neuromuscular paralysis led to respiratory collapse before the vehicle reached the facility. The medical team that met them confirmed he had not survived. The cause of death was respiratory failure from neurotoxic envenomation, consistent with a significant bite from a large king cobra with no antivenom administered within a viable window. The property was subsequently processed by wildlife and law enforcement authorities. Evidence recovered confirmed it as an active node in the Batangas port trafficking pipeline, moving king cobras and other protected reptile species sourced from across the region into export supply chains. The cobra was recovered alive from the shed. The post-incident review identified 2 protocol failures. The first was the absence of snakebite medical kits, including staged antivenom in the team's equipment during a search of a known wildlife trafficking site. The second was the decision to enter the holding structures before wildlife specialist support had arrived on site. Both gaps were formally addressed in,